Hello, good morning. I'm Phil Beatty. I'm the Chief Knowledge Officer at Times Higher Education. I'm your host and your chair for today. Um, when we were deciding what we should call this webinar in discussion with our event partner, AECC Global, the question on my mind was simply, what now? We're a year into the global health and economic crisis. I, for one, didn't imagine for a second that when we started thinking about lockdown this time last year, that 11 months later, we'd still be stuck in our homes, that borders would be in effect closed, that students would still be largely working off campus remotely, that the UK economy would still in many respects be locked down. I won't dwell today on the terrible personal tragedies many of us have faced beyond expressing my sincere sympathies to everyone who's been touched by this horrendous pandemic. So I'm going to focus relentlessly on the positives as much as possible. And I think there are some really good reasons for optimism, both personally and professionally. Firstly, obviously, the UK vaccination program is going remarkably well, bringing real hope. The data is looking good. Hospitalizations are down, deaths are down, cases are dropping dramatically. The vaccination program really does look like it's starting to work as well. Of course, we've had a strikingly upbeat new international education strategy, very recently launched by the government, which I think has genuinely raised hopes amid all the gloom. And the latest figures from UCAS just today, I think, have shown some really healthy increased applications from international students outside the EU. The EU is a very different story, but overall, applications from places like India, China up very well. Suggestions that the post-study work options that were introduced have really been effective. So I think there's a great reason for optimism. So it's a perfect time, I think, for us all to take stock and ask ourselves, what now? We have a fantastic panel of real experts to help us answer the question. I'll introduce them very soon. And please be ready, of course, for you to share your thoughts. Use the chat box, comment at any time, ask lots of questions. We will be doing some audience polling as well during the course of this session. But before we get going, I just want to introduce and thank our hosts for this session, really, AECC Global. They've supported this event, made sure we can put it on. So we're going to hear a brief market update from them just before we get into the meat of the conversation. So let's hear from AECC Global.
AECC Global is proud to work with Times Higher Education to help students around the world realize their dreams to study abroad. Our global team of over 500 dedicated professionals in 34 offices throughout 12 countries are ready to support students almost anywhere in the world.
AECC is opening up a truly global network, and that's really impressive to me, and it's something that I really want to engage with and support.
AECC Global not only represented in so many different countries and provides us with a fantastic network, but is always very professional and innovative and a delight to deal with.
And they are incredible to work with, and easy and knowledgeable and innovative, you can think of it.
We are proud to have a growing global footprint. We are continuing to open new offices around the world. Our exceptional and amazing team is continuing to grow. We employ more than 500 dedicated professionals around the world. We've come a long way, but we're just getting started.
AECC Global is rapidly growing market share in the UK, Canada, USA, and Australia. Technology is transforming the way students engage with education. And at AECC Global, we are leading the way with new innovations, shaping the future of student recruitment. We are creating world-class self-service platforms for students, making applying to university convenient and faster. Our brand new student portal launching in 2021 will allow students to directly apply to courses via computer or mobile devices. From start to finish, students will be able to choose courses and apply via our platform with our intelligent document requirement generator and compliance team, ensuring applications of quality at the press of a button. students will be able to manage applications, insurance, and browse a wide range of relevant education content. Our tailor-made, user-friendly course search platform is redefining the way students can search and filter universities and courses online. With rich images and powerful search options, including career outcome searches, accreditation search, and post-study work visa searches, AECC Global is leading the way. At AECC Global, we are dedicated to improving the student experience, from making it easier to study abroad to making it more accessible than ever before. As we emerge from the COVID-19 pandemic, AECC Global is positioned as one of the top student recruitment organisations in the world, and we look forward to continuing to build new relationships with world-class education providers. When it comes to studying overseas, more students are choosing AECC Global.
On behalf of AECC Global, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar. My name is Darryl Fong and I'm the COO of AECC Global. We're excited to be hosting this event with the Times Higher Education to facilitate this important discussion in the national education industry. We know the past 12 months was unlike anything we have seen before as a result of the pandemic. It's been hard on many institutions and students that we support in their education journeys. At AECC Global, we are proud to say that we've always continued our support for our students and institution partners during this period. We have also continued to run major online events and campaigns to support the recruitment of prospective new students. If your university or institutions would like to diversify its international education student mix, or like to partner with AECC Global, please email us at clientrelations@aeccglobal.com. Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you will gain some valuable insights from the panel of industry experts here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that sponsor message. First up, I think we want to set the scene a little. So I'm actually really delighted that we have Janet Ilieva. I'm sure she doesn't actually need much of an introduction to this audience, but Janet is the founder and director of the research consultancy Education Insight and has had an illustrious career and is a real expert on international student mobility. And perhaps you'll have noticed there is a new UK international education strategy. So to hear Janet's thoughts on where we stand at the moment and what that strategy means in terms of its potential for the sector and the way forward, I'm delighted that we'll introduce you now, Janet, to share some ideas, and then we'll open up to the panel discussion shortly after that. Thank you.
I'm delighted to join today's conversation about international student recruitment, and it's such a timely session, and I doubt many really know exactly what is going on, simply because the indicators that we are so reliant on at the moment are not properly signaling exactly what they should be telling us about, such as student visas when most of the population is studying online. We've got some positive signals about non-EU demand through the UCAS data, and this is also supported by last year's recruitment cycle HISA data for 2019-20 that shows some strong rebound in international student demand for UK education. So UK is back on track with double-digit growth, which is most positive. To observe 12% growth, and the overall student population is 556,000. Demand is strongly driven by China that experienced 20% growth in its entrance population that are just over 104,000. And Indian students had 128% growth, which is again phenomenal. We are back to the levels that were experienced some decade ago. And this is again supported by the UCAS applications data. However, the current recruitment cycle is a little bit less clear. My impressions are that most of the university's fears were not quite fulfilled. It is not as bad as we feared it would be. And such, it seems that there is quite a varied response across the university sector. Universities that had experience in digital technologies and online learning appear to were better prepared in their response to the pandemic. But also those that have experienced international partners were also better equipped to support students in their home country. One of the actually not one, but quite a few examples from the UK, Australia, and elsewhere shows on-campus style support for international students in their home country. And this is really making the most of the international partners network to support international students during this time. I think that one of the areas that which prominence will grow during the current years will be employability, graduate employability, which actually takes me on the international education strategy. Mindful of that, I think it's fair to say that the pandemic has put public spending under significant constraints. As such, education as a whole is likely to see some reductions in its funding. But on the other hand, what we are seeing is a fairly weaker labour markets that our graduates will join upon graduation. And this will put pressure on the post-study work route that the international education strategy has opened for international students. So there are just a few constraints and considerations to be mindful of in the context of the years to come. Moving on the international education strategy, I was really pleased to see support for transnational education. Institutions strong in that space have seen that they had to put their trust in their international partners. Engagement was strengthened, and that's not just student recruitment, but across many areas of operation. And T&E is now one of the key pillars of the new international education strategy. Post-study work route is a most welcome development, and this is reflected in some of the non-EU market applications. But I think it's fair to say UK is back in the game in the post-study workspace, but it's only basically catching up with what other countries had to offer. And that is the context in Australia, US, Canada, and many other countries. The most welcome development in that space is expanding the route to accommodate articulating students from transnational education courses onto education in the UK. Now those students have equal access to post-study work opportunities, and I think that is key in the years to come, when we'll see middle-class families' disposable income adversely affected by the pandemic and by weaker economic climate. As such, cost-effective means to an international degree, I think, will be quite essential, and they will shape the years to come. In that context, post-study work opportunities for students that graduate in the UK or only study partway through their studies in the UK, having access to the labour market is a significant strength of the UK offer. It's also fair to say that the international education strategy, this is an export strategy, and it's very much aimed to support the education exports. I think the UK has a lot to offer there. The latest report from the Department of Education values education export at £23.28 billion. If I'm to put that into the context of the services exports that are published and monitored by the ONS, it basically puts it just above the UK's largest services export, which is financial services. In 2018, that was valued at £21.7 billion. I think that in that context, what we have is education exports is the UK's largest services export. this is in the context of basically banking services and tourism are excluded. But with that caveat, education exports are the country's largest single export. And I think it's only fair that it's properly monitored and tracked by the ONS. And as such, the contribution that education makes to the national economy and wealth is well monitored and tracked as such. Moving on to some gaps in the strategies, I think that research is one of the areas that possibly more could have been done, and that's the space of doctoral training in the UK. As I mentioned earlier, the economic climate is likely to reduce public spending on higher education, and with that we'll see less state-funded scholars seeking a doctoral training in the UK. We have the impacts of Brexit affecting EU students, and mindful of the fact that half of the students, half of the PhD entrants in the UK are from outside the UK, I see that as quite a significant challenge to be working with. But on the other hand, there are also opportunities. The pandemic has shifted university teaching into the online space. Students can receive education wherever they are, and that has a significant lower carbon footprint as such, so the environmental impact has become very evident during the current pandemic. But on the other hand, it has made many much more aware and closer to the students and their hardship. I'm seeing a greater number of institutions engaging proactively with the World Sustainable Development Agenda. So I think that we're seeing two positive trends, climate change and sustainable development, that has been featuring quite highly on university priorities. And I shall pause here and possibly unpick some of these topics in the later discussion.
Well, thank you very much, Janet. I think that was a really good way of just setting out quite a lot of conversation points and lots to follow up on there. So I think that's the great moment to bring in the panel. So I'm delighted that we can welcome, finally, I almost did it prematurely, but finally now, Colin Riordan. He's the President and Vice Chancellor of Cardiff University, of course. We have Andy Howells, the Assistant Director, Universities UK International. Andy conceived the We Are Together social media campaign, which was a student-led campaign, very much about trying to build that community of international students in the UK during the pandemic. So it'll be good to hear about that a bit later on. David Pillsbury, Deputy Vice Chancellor International at Coventry University, and a convener of the Deputy Vice Chancellor Community for Internationalisation. And of course, we also have Eric Lithander, the Pro Vice Chancellor International and Student Recruitment at the University of Bristol. So a fantastic panel to add to Janet's expertise. Please do, I can see there's lots of you here on the call, so use the chat box, ask lots of questions, make lots of comments, share your experience. We'll keep this very conversational, but I think to start, perhaps I'll ask, maybe if I go to you first, Colin, what's your sense of the kind of key lessons we've learned from 2020 that might be things that we can bring in to enrich and evolve our student recruitment strategy for the future as the United Kingdom?
Morning, Phil, and morning, everybody. And I imagine that the biggest lesson we've all learned is how rapidly we can adapt when we actually need to do that, and when everybody sees the need to do so. I was extremely impressed. I think we all were at the beginning of lockdown here, when we found that pretty well every university in the UK was capable of shifting teaching online and student support online. And that is a really key point, that it's not just about sort of putting your classes on Zoom. There's the whole paraphernalia of how we look after our students. And we did that in a sort of emergency way, slightly hand to mouth as it had to be. But I think what's been remarkable since then is the way the whole sector has rapidly been evolving methodologies and professionalizing remote learning and teaching and student support, and they're just creating this whole notion of blended learning, blended working, which is going to transform the sector into the future. So that's one thing I think we've learned. I think the other thing that's really struck me is how determined international students were to continue to travel, even at the very height of the pandemic. So through the autumn, when things were really getting pretty difficult, case numbers were rising rapidly in the UK. And we still had, not perhaps obviously in the same numbers as we would have done, but we still had large numbers of students who were prepared to overcome all the considerable obstacles that were there in order to be able to actually come here in person. And I think that's something we can feel is a useful pointer to how things might develop into the future.
Yeah, that was extraordinary. I was quite gloomy in the early stages, thinking that actually the perceptions of safety, they certainly seemed, as some of the East Asian countries seemed like they were getting a grip on the pandemic more effectively than we were in the United Kingdom, that those perceptions of safety would really shift the dial in terms of the choices students were making. But it's been remarkable how the brand of the UK has held up, and students have still really shown, voted with their feet, that they still really value coming here. Maybe we could ask you, David, to reflect on that same question, really, just that sort of, how was it for you 2020? What have you kind of learned, and how do we take any of those learnings into kind of the way we strategize our recruitment going forward?
I think Colin really nailed one of the defining features of our sector. And to link to what you said at the beginning, Phil, I think this sector and the NHS have really risen to the challenge in quite remarkable ways. I think what I would say is the challenge for us now is to sustain it. Staff are tired, fatigued. I mean, in Coventry, we have 3 intakes a year, so it is relentless. We've got nearly 10,000 overseas students. So we need to think about how we will manage our workforce and support them going forwards, because it will continue to be challenging. And that's a big challenge for institutional leaders, I think. And segues into what was previously a concern about mental health for students, not just overseas students, but all students. And we need to be concerned. And I think that in loco parentis role will be much more evident within the overseas sector going forwards, and institutions will need to think carefully how they respond to that, because obviously that increased costs, although it does provide much more security and certainty to students, and that is going to be part of what's necessary. I mean, my own view is that we need to beware thinking that the COVID generation will make decisions on the same basis as the pre-COVID generation. We know that students that are and their parents that are emotionally invested in a certain intent, as you said, Phil, will carry through on that. We're certainly seeing some evidence that the behaviours of the generation making these decisions within the pandemic are different. They're applying to more locations, making multiple choices in terms of jurisdictions. We've seen that before, but never at this level. And so, whilst, as you say, the UCAS data is helpful, it's a very small subset of the overseas student market, and I wouldn't want us to be sanguine. There is some indication that the sector might be in for a rather turbulent September. There are suggestions of 30% down in even some of the big recruiters. And I would go back to Janet's point, which is the real problem for us is that that decades-long link between intention and action that we've relied on has been broken. Yeah, and we need now to focus more on forward-looking parameters, things like IDP Connect, study portals, those people that are telling us about student intent, not what happened some time ago. And we need to really then understand the data and understand then what students will actually do to increase the signal to noise ratio. Again, picking up what Janet said, all roads lead to China. Yeah, you may not like it, but there is no alternative, and we have to find a sophisticated and adult way of engaging with China as a country, not just as a sector. And some of you will have seen the British Foreign Policy Survey yesterday. Actually, the UK population very supportive of students coming to the UK, and indeed actually quite supportive of research links. So we just need to understand that, because there is India and there is Saudi Arabia, and then there is a very, very long tail of very, very small countries. then we need a more balanced view of online. I mean, Janet talked about the rise of online, but I think what the sector has learned is that we are a community, that we are a people business that provide a personal service that can be enriched and enabled by online. Some people will take that online offer, but actually what most people want is that face-to-face community experience, and that's what they will pay for. And you know, if we don't get the money, we don't generate the surpluses, we're not going to develop as a sector. I won't dwell on employability. I agree absolutely with Janet, and also agree with Janet on T&E, and particularly the importance of pathways. My last point, if I may, which goes back to your sponsors, is I think the thing we've really seen, which goes back to the comments about data, is the rise of recruitment ecosystems. And obviously the THE development is one example of that, certainly in my view. You know, we are seeing aggregators, data platforms coming together in these pillars, driven by artificial intelligence and machine learning, so that we are really not digitizing, we are data intensifying the recruitment journey, again, in the best examples that's supporting the role of recruitment agents and the traditional advisors. That is going to be an absolutely transformative for the sector. And those people who don't get on the bandwagon early, I think, are going to find themselves seriously disadvantaged. And thank you for indulgence. I know I've taken quite a long time.
Well, that's a good prompt for me to mention. Absolutely, yeah. One of the things that Times Higher Education's been doing in 2020 is investing very significantly into its student audience. 50 years old this year, we've been obviously serving the university professional community, academic and administrators for 50 years, but actually we've attracted many millions, 14, 15 million students to our website every year because of all of our controversial rankings. And we've really invested heavily in how we can support those students, but more importantly, connect those students to universities and really support the ecosystem using our data. So thanks for giving me an opportunity to plug that, David, and we're delighted to work with the community. But Eric, perhaps I could come to you on that same opening question, really, your reflections on 2020, the core lessons you've picked up and how they might change the way we look at recruitment going forward.
Well, I think if we've learned one thing, it's that we somehow got out of jail last year. And Janet referred to the fact that the potentially precipitous drop that we were expecting didn't happen. I know that the picture is different according to different universities, but the reality is that some providers not only did not see a precipitous drop, but they actually saw increases in their enrollments from the previous years. Now, I think that some of the factors which contributed to that might be replicated this coming year and others won't. So for example, Australia and New Zealand were largely closed for business this last cycle. The United States, I think, was particularly unappetizing potentially to some applicants. That may not be repeated from September onwards. That might change significantly, and that will change the competitive landscape. I think that students were prepared to indulge us with their patience for the online provision that we put in place. It was great that we could do it. I'm not sure all of us are doing it at world-class standard, and it will be interesting to see the extent to which we can convince students who will still have significant uncertainty in their minds about what's happening this coming cycle, whether what we're offering them will be worth taking a risk on. So we definitely need to keep improving that blended offering, because I think that's going to be the key to the coming cycle.
Thank you, Eric. Maybe I'll bring Andy in there. I mean, just to sort of take that forward, Andy, as we look to 21 and beyond, I mean, do you think the student expectations have shifted very significantly? What is the implication in terms of meeting student demand and expectation, in terms of that blended experience, in terms of how flexible we need to be, in terms of how supportive we need to be? What's shifting in terms of our offer as a sector to the international student community?
Yeah, thanks, Phil. I think just picking up on a point Eric made there, about sort of his comment about getting out of jail. I think probably one of the lessons that I'd have a view that we need to take forward into the future is that I think we need to really strengthen at a national level the way we market UK study overseas. I think as Eric points out, I think we've been almost fortunate in that the UK has remained open in large parts throughout the pandemic to international students, whereas other competing destinations haven't. And I think that's gained us an advantage that we haven't necessarily earned ourselves. And I think in terms of changing perceptions or student expectations, I think probably the overwhelming thing from the pandemic, going back to a point Colin made in his opening remarks, was the need really to relearn the lesson that we have to really look after our current international students, because in doing that, prospective international students more than ever are looking at how we are doing that and how well we are doing that. And I think strengthening our marketing overseas, which is a point as well within the IES, to really strengthen and improve the Study UK campaign, for example. But being bolder and braver to put our students, at the heart of what we do, in terms of letting them tell their peers exactly how well they're being looked after. It's not just about the sort of learning experience. It's also much broader than that. Students come here because they don't just want a high quality education. In the UK, we turn those students into global citizens. And I think that there's definitely a lesson there that we need to take forward around sort of change in perception.
It's quite interesting, Andy. You talk about perhaps how we could be more aggressive in selling ourselves. I mean, obviously the Britain is Great campaign is powerful. It's been effective, but what specifically do you think we'd maybe change in terms of messages then?
I mean, we've been doing a lot of work in UKI with our members on this. I mean, I think we ended up in during the course of the pandemic. UKI as a membership organisation ended up running a prospective student-facing campaign on behalf of the sector. And I think that some of the big things that need to change, I think, we're having positive conversations with British Council about potential improvements to the Study UK campaign in close consultation with the sector. But some of those things, for example, if you stack Study UK up against, say, the performance of Study New Zealand, for example, while Study UK brings, I think, around 4.5 million prospective students into their websites every year, I think throughout the pandemic, universities have really started asking, well, what's happening to that interest that you're drumming up? Whereas you look abroad at competing campaigns, and what you'll find is they have a much closer working relationship with their universities. So you take Study New Zealand, they don't just bring that level of interest in through their campaign, but they're very closely aligned with campaigns and the comms and marketing work of their universities. There's a much more holistic and joined up user journey. So they're able to actually, for example, they turn that interest into inquiries, which they pass on to their universities. So, I think they delivered 80,000 inquiries to New Zealand universities in the last 12 months. That's names, email addresses, hi, I'm Andy, I'm interested in this course at this university. There's a lot more joined upness going on there, a lot more clear and transparent value being delivered, whereas Study UK at the moment is designed to just raise that awareness. It doesn't drive any leads or inquiries to UK university. I think that's just one aspect of it. I think there's many other things in there. I think UKI at the moment kind of have a number of asks around government, for example, to provide greater non-ODA funding to Study UK, so that they can operate in European markets, for example, which I think is going to be another big thing. But I think, what we've seen, and I heard Robin Bew talk at a British Council event recently about Brexit and elements of COVID kind of changing the narrative that the UK is open and welcoming to international students, and the need to market harder against that. And again, I think that's another point that I agree with. But I think, we can't just sort of think that we'll get out of jail again next year. We have to really be bolder and braver in the way that we market.
Yeah, we can't, now Trump's gone, we can't rely on that to help us, and we can't rely on Australia to keep sending out some rather negative messages and actually getting themselves into a bit of a hole here. I wonder if I could ask you, Colin, to come back in on this issue around selling the sector as a whole. I mean, you've represented the UK at the Vice Chancellor level at Universities UK on the international strategy, but of course you represent a Welsh institution. I'm just quite interested in the distinctiveness element around UK versus its constituent parts, working with Wales separately, with Scotland separately in terms of the USPs, the sort of messaging. How do you sort of navigate the need for that differentiation with the need also for the the community, the sector to unite as a single entity?
That's a really, really interesting question. Thanks, Phil. It's I noticed we have the International Education Strategy now in 2019, which is presented as, as UK and Britain, without any specific focus, certainly not upfront on the devolved administrations. If you look back at the original one back in 2013, that was launched by Vince Cable and the forward by David Willits, that has a preface talking about the four nations and this is an England strategy. We seem to have gone away from that. And that's not something I'm particularly complaining about, actually, because the real strong brand internationally is the UK. And people associate the UK and England and sort of look at them interchangeably externally to the UK. So some people do within the UK. So the challenge really is for the DAs, for the devolved administrations, to take that on and navigate that. And we've actually been having intensive discussions about how we can position our organisation here in Wales, Global Wales, to retain all the advantages of the UK brand, which are very considerable. The quality, the support of our government, which is tremendous. I think we can go out there saying, we're a welcoming nation for international students. We care about our students. We really do offer excellent student support, both on campus and off campus. I think we can do all of that. But then I think we need to position ourselves, Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales, as having distinctive other aspects. So, if I talk about Cardiff is a capital city, but it's a capital city of 300,000 people. You can walk across it in 20 minutes. You can cycle everywhere. You don't need to use public transport. It's the human capital, if you see what I mean. So, and everyone will have that type of approach. And of course, there's a different heritage. There's linguistic variety and so on. So I think there really are opportunities there, particularly in certain markets. And I think the way in which the UK is actually composed of four nations is something that is actually quite helpful in certain markets like North America, for example. And I noticed in the recent, or in fact today's publication from UCAS that there's quite a rise in applications from the US as well, which is something I think we should all be looking at.
Yeah, I always remember a conversation in Australia where there's some sense of frustration actually that the pitch was for Australia, and there was perhaps a sense that also meant everyone was effectively losing that sense of differentiation. There was a sense that perhaps everyone was associated with sunshine and wine and some of the more frivolous things that are attractive to in that nation. So I think differentiation's an interesting one. I'll just stick to the point about the reputational aspects before we move on to some of the market stuff, but maybe going back to you, Andy, briefly. One of the things that we were hit with in terms of public perception, particularly one particular news story that was quite disturbing was some of the hardships international students felt in terms of access to support. There was reports of students requiring to use a food bank in East London, for example. How does that resonate, and what should be the sector response to those sorts of stories of real hardship and really potentially very negative stories that might go back to people's home nations?
And I think that the hardship issues, I think it's a really interesting one. I know at UEKI we've spoken to numerous universities over the last few weeks, and there's just so much provision going on for international students at the moment that are falling into hardship. There's provision of food vouchers, there's emergency support in place daily for students in hardship who are hungry for it. I know the University of East London provide hot takeaway meal on campus every day to any student in financial hardship. There's wraparound care, confidential advice, wellbeing support. There's some flexibility on student fee payment plans. And there seems to be a real proactive engagement with students to ensure they know what support's available and how to access it. Universities are working with local communities and food banks. I think one of the issues here, though, is just the very complex nature of international student hardship. I think every case is different, and hardship has occurred when students have been unable to return home as scheduled due to travel restrictions, or when they can perhaps no longer access part-time jobs that they travelled here relying on, or their families or sponsors have been unable to send funds as planned from home due to COVID-related issues. And I think as well, many may not want to come forward to actually talk to their university out of pride or worry around their visa status. And I think universities are doing a lot. They're reaching out and even promoting things like UKISA's confidential helpline, for example. But that was just an illustration of the complexities that exist there. And I think that whilst universities are doing all they can, and UKI have recently put together a joint task force with London Higher looking at this to make some best practice recommendations to all universities in this area. But I think, whilst universities are doing all they can, I think ultimately there is a limit to what they can do. And as I said, a lot of these issues that are here because of the pandemic, there needs to be good government support as well, and good collaborative working across the sector to try and solve them. But I mean, one thing I would point out is that back in December, I think IDP released an insights survey which highlighted that international students that chose to study in the UK during 2020 throughout the pandemic were actually more satisfied across a number of areas, including the support they've been provided with during the pandemic than international students who chose to study in other destinations. So we are doing something right, and I think when the issues like Newham is raised in the media, I think that we have to continue to show the leadership we did. Vivian Stern went on Channel 4, the director of UKI, and I think did a fantastic job in responding to that. And since universities have looked to investigate exactly what is going on there, and are taking strong actions to correct that. Because I think going back to the point at the start, we know that kind of change in perceptions that mean that prospective international students are really looking at how universities are looking after their current international students right now.
Thanks, Andy. I'm definitely going to leave some time at the end for audience questions, so please do send them in. But we're getting a few questions as we talk, and just on the point, Colin, about the devolved nations, I thought I'd bring this one in now because it's quite an interesting contribution. It's from Wendy Alexander, who of course works at Dundee University, but is a trade envoy for Scotland as well. She was saying good points from Colin. I agree about the devolved administrations needing to nest into umbrella UK brand with a distinctive flavour around cultural identity, different parts of the UK. But what are your thoughts about the greatest opportunities for global Wales post-COVID, and for government and government links and what they can do to support that? Any lessons for UK and supporting UK and HIs internationally? But is there a particular sense that Wales can do something, go out on its own and really create a very clear vision of what Wales is as distinct from being part of the UK as a higher education destination?
Yeah, absolutely. And hello, Wendy. So this is that's absolutely what we're trying to do with Global Wales is to get Wales really out there internationally with an international profile for higher education, because we think we do have a strong story to tell. And in fact, we've learned quite a lot of lessons from Scotland, because Scotland has been doing this for years. We had Global Wales for the past 2 or 3 years, and it's recently been refunded by the Welsh government. And personally, I think there is a real opportunity there to, and the key is, I feel, to align what we do as Global Wales with the international education strategy, so that you're seeing something coherent but differentiated, and so that students will see what you would get from the Welsh university system, which is the opportunity to be in a country that is a beautiful, very, very friendly, and sort of more on a human scale, if you see what I mean. And also, I think the other point I'd make, and I don't want to take too much time on this, but the other point I would make is that since we do now have these opportunities for blended learning, it's going to be much more possible for university systems, as it were, and we do work very closely. The eight campus universities in Wales work very closely together to actually to collaborate and to offer a coherent palette for students who are coming here and may well benefit from the fact that there are several universities working together under one administration, which I think is an advantage that we can exploit.
Thank you. Thanks. I think, Janet, I'll bring you back in here because I think we'll maybe move to the global marketplace. It's a common refrain. We've seen it actually in previous eras where there have been particular economic shocks in particular markets. But do you think that the UK higher education sector is too dependent on specific markets? I think David mentioned all roads lead to China, but obviously we're heavily dependent on India and China. We've had some real challenges with India, which are changing, but do we need to really diversify? There is that long tail. It's much more complex, a recruitment package, but what's your view around diversifying our dependencies there?
Thank you, Phil. It's quite a difficult question, and it kind of really depends on one's point of view. I think that if we look at the countries that are popular with international students, there is a very long tail beyond the 50%. So several countries would contribute towards half of the international students, but I think it's good to be mindful of the world demographics. For instance, China is roughly a fifth of the world's population, and Chinese students, as such, they're roughly 24-25% of the international students in the UK. They're much more, they become heavily represented if the EU students are taken out of the equation. Then it's about 35% of the non-EU student population. And I think their visibility is likely to increase if we have significant declines in the EU student population. So in terms of reliance, I think that basically the two perhaps challenges is China and EU, and these two collectively account for 55% of the non-UK student population. We've got Brexit that is putting threats and challenges towards EU recruitment, and we've got rising geopolitical tensions with China. So at the moment, UKHE is doing a fantastic job, but there are factors at play in the wider context that are putting under threat more than half of the international student population in the UK. I think that it's a difficult space to navigate, because when we talk about diversification, well, however we diversify, China would always be fifth of the world's population, and there isn't much we can do about that. India is the second largest country in the world. We are seeing strong rebound in students from India. As such, and post-study work visas are doing fantastic job in that space. I think that the difficulty in that space is that it seems that the UK at the moment is taking market share from other countries. The constraint in India is disposable income. The middle class is significantly smaller compared to the middle class in China. And we know that the two factors that drive student demand are basically disposable income and having children in the right age group. China has more of the income side, India has more of the on the population side, but you need a combination of the two to manifest itself in a viable student demand. I think that it will be talking about diversification is a difficult one. We work in the constraints that we've got at the moment, and the geopolitics is not going to go away. We have to live with it. And I think a strong message of commitment to the students, and this is non-political commitment, engaging with their population is probably a message that sends this goodwill of reassurance to potential students. I guess a lot of the concerns around China are basically about meddling of the Chinese Communist Party and threats coming from that. But I think it's, again, putting it into context, looking at the HISA data, we know that 90% of the Chinese students are self-funded. With that in mind, this is the middle class of China that the UK is engaging with. And I think it's a very different kind of engagement. And this is where education diplomacy, public diplomacy probably has a very good role to play. For the sector, I think it's basically unity that is required, and means to engage is the students and their families that they're engaging with. And politics comes secondary to that, but it is part of the picture, it's part of the environment.
Thank you, Janet. Actually, that leads on to a question that has come in from Ruth Arnold, previously representing Sheffield University. I'm sure some of you know, and Sheffield had a very strong relationship with China. She's asking you, David, to comment, based on your comments earlier on China. Do you think that we need a specific positive campaign to Chinese students to counter current concerns about a lack of welcome or political tensions? The headlines seem to be ever more negative about intellectual property theft and funding defense and military. What's your sense of how we should work with China? Ruth thinks a positive campaign focused on China would be positive. What's your sense?
Well, I'd like to link this to what Janet said, actually, which is there's no point doing fantasy international recruitment. Yeah, we have to deal with the reality of the market, and we also have to deal with the reality of geopolitics. I'm a proud Englishman, as you can probably see, and there's no sense in which I would do anything that compromised the UK's interests. But as I said earlier, the public is very supportive of Chinese students coming, and actually Chinese collaboration. And clearly we need to protect our interests from all of those foreign actors. And I think it's great that UKI does not specify, it just talks about threats, and any country needs to safeguard those things. But we do need to be then welcoming, and certainly in Coventry, when the pandemic started, we posted messages of support. We made a joint announcement with Warwick. We said that, going back to your point about welcoming people, we said that marks are not evidence of people having a disease, that they're people trying to prevent spreading of the disease. And that had tremendous impact. And I think I would link this back to Andy's point, really, which is because marketing in this area or messaging is really quite amateurish around the world, and ours is particularly mediocre, there is every opportunity to be more sophisticated in this space. And it's great that in higher education we don't beat ourselves up as we usually do as British people about everything, but we don't actually talk about the strengths of our sector, which, to go back to what Colin said, is actually very caring, very nurturing, very interested in all levels and across the institution in the welfare and success of our students. And that is possibly the most powerful sales message that you can put out. And yes, I do think that we should do that. And actually, I think that's all as important as the sales messages. I mean, I think the big problem is not so much that we're not selling the UK now, but when all of those messages were coming out about how well Canada was doing, and the Australian approach was applauded to begin with, there was silence from the UK. Just the Daily Mail talking about the horrors of the pandemic. And we need both of those things: positive messaging about how welcoming people are, as well as a sales message. And if I may just go back to Janet's point about the markets, I mean, we had some analysis done. So we are fortunate in countries. So we've got 5 markets that contribute 5% or more of our overseas recruitment, and 10 markets that contribute 2% or more. After us, only one other institution has got that level of diversity. That's, I won't name them, that's got 8. Most of the big recruiters, whether they're Russell Groups or modern universities, have got 4 markets on which they're dependent. Now, we all understand the site, people can't go out because there's cost of acquisition. Okay, but that is not an appropriate level of diversity, and people can be more imaginative and creative. It will cost money, but that is the way to become sustainable within the realities of the market. Sorry to bore on about that, but I'm quite passionate about this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Eric, perhaps I can bring you back in on this particular issue as well. I mean, there's the question of market diversity, but I guess also we have lost some really serious numbers of applicants from the EU. 40% down today. That's about 17,000 individuals, I believe. How does that perhaps impact the actual diversity of campus life for students and the implications for our future market share and where we recruit and how we deal with that big drop?
Look, I think all of us think that it's a sad state of events. Disregarding the politics of it, I think we all very much value the language, the culture, the energy that European students bring to our campus. I also think that they play a role in convincing our own students to consider study in Europe because of the relationships and the networks that they bring to our campuses. I think in the short term, we will probably all be seeking to offset those numbers with other non-EU students. Going back to something David said about pragmatism, I think the reality is that for the time being, most of us are just looking to pay the bills, and we will do whatever is required to pay the bills. And that may well mean that we are not going to be quite as ambitious with our diversification strategies in the next year or two as we would have under normal circumstances. And that is partially because money is tight, and partially because our university communities, as others have said, are tired, are stressed, are anxious, and there are only so many new ideas and new initiatives that we can introduce at the moment. So I think we will find a way of coping with Europe. I'm hoping that is going to take the form of fee-paying study abroad European undergraduates who may want to come here for a semester or for a year, and potentially in the PGT market where a one-year master's, even at £25,000, is seen to be pretty good value compared to 3 or 4 years of undergraduate education. So I think we'll figure this out, but for the next couple of years, we're probably just going to have to be pragmatic about it.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Eric. I think we'll pause and move to some audience polling, if that's all right, because I think the polling might really help us to focus the final 20 minutes or so of the conversation. So if you are able to get out your mobile phones or open a tab, there's a website, Slido, which is just sli.do. If you go on that website, you can put in the code AECC UK. And I think we'll pause for about 60 seconds to give you a chance to do that. But I think it's a really interesting way of understanding the wider sector's thoughts and views around how things are evolving. So if you can get on that site, very simple, just put that code straight in, and then we'll put some questions up on the screen. And hopefully we'll be able to ask those in real time and get some real-time feedback. Just going to give you a few more moments to log in, because hopefully as many of you as possible give us some nice, robust answers. Great. So I think we'll start on some of the questions now. Let's look at question number 1. We've had 72 responses. China, I mean, it's overwhelmingly China. So yeah, I mean, that probably makes a lot of sense. Let's move on to the next question. So I'm going to do it as a speaker view. So on 2019 student numbers, what percentage of international student commencements at your institution have decreased in 2020? And I think Janet gave us some of the indications of the bigger picture, but it's interesting to hear from individual participants. So actually, again, quite positive in the sense that some of those more gloomy predictions really haven't transpired. Majority of you with considerably less than 25%. Okay, that's great. Let's move on to the next one. During the pandemic, what's been the preferred method of engagement with students via your in-house recruitment? Has that changed? I think is an interesting conversation point. I mean, it seems to go without saying that not much face-to-face recruitment will have been happening. Perhaps some local offices. And I think this is an interesting question for discussion in the final section. Actually, do we fundamentally change how we go about the recruitment process? Are there actually efficiencies and ways that we've learned this year through necessity that will be something that we can build into the so-called new normal and actually improve? And I think the point that David made earlier about data is very much there. How do we actually get the recruitment process more efficient, more data-led, more informed? So yeah, that's really helpful to see the real shift to online there. Let's have a look at the next one. When it comes to education, agent partners, what is most important to you out of the following? Strong online student engagement capabilities, increasing student numbers. Yep, the bottom line does matter. Global footprint, student quality, innovative marketing strategies. I guess very much to your point, Eric, the bottom line, the simple process of actually getting through this this period, protecting as much as we can the actual numbers themselves are going to be the driving force. Obviously, quality looking like a very close second there, but the footprint of the partner is less important. The strategy, I guess, the strategy is less important if they deliver the results. It proves the strategy to be correct. So we've got about 100 responses there, so we can leave that one up because it's very very clear. Let's move to the next one. Thanks for your participation, everyone. I think it's really helpful to get this sector-wide view. What is your sentiment towards major sub-agents platforms that are increasingly growing in the market? That's a rather pointed question given the conversations we've had about what Times Higher has been doing in this space. So they're actually quite negative in these early responses. And it'd be good to maybe tease out some of those issues later as well about why there is that negativity there. Is it the loss of that intimate contact perhaps? Is there an issue around the fit, the sort of, I think that intimacy is maybe an issue there. So yeah, more negative. Between neutral and negative, but very much erring on the negative beyond the positive. That's about 100 respondents there. Let's to the next question so we can fit them all in. By what year do you believe student recruitment will return to pre-COVID levels? Crystal ball. Given the positive vaccines in the UK, that's great, but how much that penetrates the rest of the world? I guess core recruitment markets have also got some positive signs. Obviously, China is looking very, very strong on its COVID response. India, some really, really good vaccine rollout activity in India as well. So vast majority think not next year, but actually 23 is more likely. Interesting, some people really thinking that this is going to have a very long tail effect. 14% of you 2024. Significant amounts thinking 25, but I think the optimism suggests, hopefully a reasonably quick bounce back. 22, but most of you think 23. I think there's just a couple more we'll do. I think this is really healthy, gives us a good opportunity to talk further. How do you currently feel about international student recruitment? I was clinging on at the beginning to that sense of optimism. Janet, you said we're back in the game, but David, you asked us for a bit more of a reality check. But it's good to see that optimism, yeah. But I think optimism without the complacency is probably the key message you were pushing, David, wasn't it? That we mustn't rest on our laurels or feel that we've, and to Eric's point, we've kind of survived. We got lucky to some extent, but it's certainly a lot more we can work on. I think there's one final question. That's really great to see that optimism. Which international markets are you prioritizing in terms of student recruitment now in the light of the pandemic? So this is quite interesting. Big early burst for India. I love seeing this data coming in live. I mean, it's been fantastic to see the revival from India. Certainly it was looking really gloomy for several years, wasn't it? But the post-study work, it's been really, really effective. China really low. Southeast Asia, yeah, it's the long tail again, but Middle East low, Africa 4%, Southeast Asia, ASEAN 7%, South America 1%, that's very low. Yeah, India clearly a massive priority, but I guess that's a massive priority for many other nations. I know obviously Australia, for example, has had some really, really tense geopolitical challenges with China, more so than the UK, and have really tried to pivot more towards India. Great. Well, look, that's really, really helpful. Good insights. Let's move back to some conversation. Just going to try and remove the big picture of my own face on the screen now. Go back to gallery. I mean, are there any early reflections on those responses? I mean, maybe we could, I don't know, go back to you, David. There seemed to be quite a negative response to some of those kind of aggregator sites. Is there a sense there that there's a bit of a Wild West at the moment in terms of the people involved?
Well, you're right, Phil, but a bit like with Janet, you know, you can't buck the market. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people don't like Amazon because it's wiped out the high street, but there's just a relentless logic to it around economies of scale and the utility for people that means you can't resist it. And the day of, well, I mean, mom and pop agents are signing up anyway. As we know, that's the applied board model. Apologies if you're listening errors, but you know, I speak only for myself, not on behalf of Coventry. But you know, they're signing up third and fourth tier sub agents, and you know, the economies of scale and the utility for students that come from these aggregator platforms is just, it's just overwhelming, and because the best ones, and you know, there's Educo coming out of the States, and MSM coming out of Canada is also out of Canada has got another sort of take on this, and of course you've got your own link, Phil. What can you do? I mean, and why would you want to stand against people who are using technology to enhance the traditional advisory function with an aim to get students into the right place? I mean, actually, it's a challenge for some of us that are very good at selling, you know, because, you know, the Coventry model is to get into the heads of agents, you know, so that we make a quick, easy sale. I mean, we've got a great product. We're very proud of what we do, but our business model is reliant on that. That's why we've got very low cost of acquisition. So now we've signed up with all of these aggregator platforms and the ecosystems. We know that we need to change because it's coming. You know, if you stand in front of the steamroller, you're just going to get flattened.
That's a good analogy. There's a question that's relevant to that to some extent, but very much relevant to some of the polling there around when we might see things returning back to pre-pandemic levels. A question from Bridget Hurst. Do you believe there is pent-up demand from international students that will lead to higher than expected intakes in the next 1 or 2 years? So when we actually get out of this, will we actually see a big boost? I don't know. Janet, is it worth asking for your economist's view on that first, and then maybe we'll talk to some of the individual institution representatives?
It's an interesting question, this one, and I genuinely don't think that we'll see a huge demand, students just staying at home, waiting for the world to become a safer place. It's not very likely. They may sit for a while, but I don't see them, you know, hanging around for too long. What I expect is likely to happen, and we've seen it in kind of on a mini scale previously with East Asia currency crisis, with SARS. So usually in a pandemic situation, demand goes down for a year. But I think what we've got here is a combination of pandemic and post-pandemic recession. So I think that the pandemic would probably suppress demand for a year or so, but it's the recession that would have longer term lingering effects on student demand, mainly affecting affordability of international study. And in terms of affordability, just looking globally at what is happening, traditionally 2% of tertiary enrollments go to study abroad. This is tiny, tiny segment. What there is an opportunity preempting that this 2% may drop as such. What we can preempt is how can we improve the affordability side of an international degree, and this widens the proportion of this 2% because you're cutting into the rest of the 98% of the potential market as such. And the only way to do that is to adjust the price. So adjusting the price doesn't mean that it has to impact the quality of an education degree, but I think what we've seen happening is using flexible delivery models, and this is really working with international partners, where the education UK degree is probably delivered through different means. Maybe an undergraduate degree is delivered in 2 years, where the first year or the foundation study happens elsewhere. So there are, I guess, flexible delivery models that can be deployed to counteract the affordability aspect of an international degree. I think that the quality has to stay. I have heard quite a few universities talking about lowering the entry criteria, and this is to cater the current situation that children have been out of school for quite a while. And I think it's also good to bear in mind, this has been the case everywhere else in the world. Kids have been out of school. Some of them have really struggled to access online learning materials, etc. We live in a very flux time, and I think just being reflective and in tune with student demand and the pressures the students are, and economic pressures is only a tiny fraction of what's really at play at the moment. So I think keeping an open mind and being flexible and being responsive is probably key. And as such, we are talking about going back to normal in 23, 22. I think it's varied. It really depends on individual responses and the techniques they have to support their response to the pandemic. Whether it's the local students, international students, I think indiscriminate treatment of all students is probably key to our response, but being very mindful of the people behind. We're talking numbers, but at the end of the equation, we have students and their dreams, and that is really what we're talking about here.
Thank you. I think perhaps I'll just reflect a bit more on this idea around flexibility. We did a university leaders poll, 200 presidents of institutions around the world in quite early on in the pandemic, around May, June last year. And one of the things that seemed to come out to me was the sort of real sense of consumer power, the customer is always right, that actually universities are a bit more on the back foot in terms of competing for student numbers, of course. So there's an immediate pressure around how flexible you are in terms of entry requirements, how flexible you are in terms of delivery and pricing, but also the fact that people have been embracing entirely new ways of delivering education, that there's a much more of a blended approach, that there's a much more potential sense that you deliver at the student's convenience, at the time and place that they require. So I'm just even reflecting beyond the specific immediate demands of the pandemic. Do you think there's perhaps, and I put that to Colin, David, or Eric really, as from the institutional perspective, do you actually have to bend over backwards more to deliver for your student? Do you have to give them more flexibility? Is there pressure on the price, pressure on how much you are on the back seat in terms of their consumer power, their opportunity. Colin, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, thanks very much. And I think what Janet said was absolutely correct. This business of flexibility, and I'll come back to that. But just to go back to the original question on pent-up demand, it's a really good question. I asked it of the CBI chief economist the other day, who's obviously projecting for the global and UK economy into the future, and he gave me this lovely example where it depends what you're talking about in terms of pent-up demand. So if you go for a year without a haircut, you then don't go and get 10 haircuts to make up for it, and obviously education isn't like a haircut, but we could not, let's assume in the extreme case, no student would go to university for a year, we wouldn't be able very easily, not without huge preparation, to teach 2 whole year cohorts at once. Although in fact Germany did that when they had a double equivalent of A-level year once a few years ago. I think the point that arises out of this, and it comes back to what you actually asked, Phil, is that what the pandemic has done is shown us how flexible we really can be, because demand goes up and down all the time. We're used to dealing with that. We'll deal with the Brexit drop, and we'll deal with the demographic rise in home students, and we'll deal with whatever perturbations come up. But I think we'll deal with them better, because what we normally can't do is flex capacity very rapidly to take account of changing demand. So we can't suddenly employ hundreds more academics or reduce the workforce, for a year or two. It just doesn't work like that, because it's a long game. I think what the new flexibility we have with remote delivery and the ability not to be bound by how many classrooms do we have, and are we going to have to hire a hotel, to sort of teach and accommodate students. I think what this will do will allow us to accommodate these surges and drops in demand as they go along, and sort of smooth them out. So I think there is a real opportunity for the sector, not just in the UK, of course. So, the other aspect of this will be that we will be competing much, much more broadly across the world, because everybody else is doing the remote and the blended learning too. So I think it will actually increase competition. But all of this, and this is my final point, will come back in favour of the student. So I think the answer to your question is, I wouldn't say that we're on the back foot. I think we're on the front foot in responding really positively to exactly the point that Janet made, that what we have to have in mind here is we really owe a huge obligation to this generation of students, and generations of students for 2, 3, 4, 5 years now, who've really suffered in this pandemic, that they've lost kind of years of their lives and experiences that they're not going to get back at an age that it's really difficult to compensate for. So I think, that the challenge to us is really to make up for that in terms of the experience we can offer, and really smoothing that out as much as we can for them.
Thanks, Colin. David, do you want to come in on that same conversation as well?
Well, yeah, maybe quickly. I'm conscious I've spoken a lot, and Eric's got interesting things to say. I mean, I'd say I'm a great believer in the 3-year undergraduate residential experience. My son actually was at Bristol and having a great time despite everything. And we need not to lose sight of the centrality of that. But absolutely, there's going to be a fragmentation of models, and we're going to use technology to enrich it. And Colin's quite right that we'll be using that to flex capacity in the UK. But I'd like to go back to what Janet's earlier point, which is that actually the great opportunity for us is to build this capacity and capability outside of the UK, but within a UK value system. The big opportunity for the UK is to do T&E properly. Not in the transactional, rather toxic way that we do it now, but in a way that is co-created with our partners, where it's very focused on employability, where we exploit the local ecosystem rather than try and drive it out. And if we were to do that, we can actually get the fee levels up to the point at which we make the surpluses, both partners, that can be reinvested. I mean, the problem with T&E is that we do it so badly, not in terms of quality, but in terms of the fact that there is so much potential to have a product that is different from the home offer, but equally value. And I'm delighted that Russell Group universities and others who haven't traditionally done this are coming into the market. We need new models.
Thanks, David. Eric, did you want to come in on that quickly? There is another question we've got in, but do you want to reflect on that one as well?
Very briefly, the story that your polling results tell us is that we're not dealing with one UK higher education sector. There are multiple UK higher education sectors, and some universities are clearly more immune to COVID, excuse the pun, than others. And I think as we move into this coming very uncertain cycle, and in the years beyond, it really is those universities that either have the very high rankings, the very visible profiles, or the very, very compelling quality of educational offering and employability, which are going to continue being largely immune. And I think students will realize that their student experience won't be potentially as great over the next couple of years as they would have liked. And they are going to be even choosier and even more careful about the reputation and the quality of that piece of paper, which ultimately is what they're coming out with.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll just squeeze a quick one in, which is possibly a yes/no sort of answer, really, from Pancham Shukla, who refers to Theresa May's time in the Home Office, the hostile environment, the real dip in recruitment from the Indian subcontinent in particular. He's saying, and I think obviously we've moved on post-study work visas, but would an even more generous post-study work visa be useful in attracting more students from the subcontinent? Do we need to be more, even more open to that, or have we seen that what's already taken place as having a positive effect? I don't know, maybe Andy, you could reflect on that, I guess, from a policy perspective.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Phil. I mean, I think first and foremost, I think I know UEKI and others have put a lot of work in over a number of years to get post-study work back. So I think initially I'd probably reflect on that, and that has clearly brought with it an uplift in demand. But I think probably before we start talking about whether we now want to put efforts into extending that, I think Janet made a point that it's just sort of catching up really, rather than getting ahead in terms of wider offer. But I think before we start looking at that, I do think we need to look in the current economic climate at whether we can deliver on the promise of the current offer that we do have. So I think that would probably be my initial response.
Yeah, thanks. I think, and Janet's points about the actual state of the economy itself is going to take a lot of working through, I think. We're just down to the last couple of minutes, actually. So I wondered if I could sort of ask you all, we touched on it at the beginning, but the offer itself, what is the UK's sort of primary offer, message, opportunity to seize the day and to make sure it is absolutely back in the game, as Janet said earlier. Very quick responses. Maybe I could ask you all to come back on that. Should we go to you, David?
So picking up what Eric said, we're a very welcoming country, multicultural country, a very small country that makes everything accessible. In London, and there are obviously other capital cities, Edinburgh and Cardiff, but they provide these single points that are financial, cultural, entertainment capitals. Everything is there in one place. And then when you ally to that the focus on employability and the UK's reputation for enterprise and innovation in a way that is, I think, much more relevant to the sorts of countries that we're recruiting from than the American, start Amazon up in your garage. That is an incredibly compelling proposition. And I think, just to answer your point about work experience, doing that virtually with employers in the countries that these students are coming from is the answer. That's where we need to focus. Virtual work experience overseas. Thank you.
Thanks. Colin, can I invite you back in to conclude with the big message?
Yes, well, I think it's really to come in behind what David just said, that we are a welcoming country. We know from surveys that the UK, that the population of the UK sees international students as a good thing, a welcoming, a supportive. We now have a major shift, there's no doubt about this, a major shift in government policy that takes the same view. And I think working together, the sector, local communities and government, we can really show international students that you'll continue to have a fantastic experience in the UK, and you'll end up with a qualification that's going to hugely improve your prospects. And I think that is a compelling proposition.
Thanks, Colin. Janet, I see your mic is on. Are you able to throw your thoughts in briefly?
Thank you. I think I would like to draw on the one of the areas that is not touched by the national international education strategy, and there is a real opportunity for the UK HE sector to lead globally in terms of engagement with the world's sustainable development agenda and climate change. I know these are outside the IES, but I think there is a true scope, there is a gap at the moment, and this is global leadership. And these are fantastic areas to dip into and to lead on.
Thank you. And I may not quite have time for you, Andy, because you can take this away and develop the campaign. But Eric, do you want to just make some final thoughts as well? We've got 60
I actually like the narrative behind the Prime Minister's Global Britain agenda, the Global Britain story. And if we can make that a reality, a country which is genuinely open to partnership around the world, almost as a fresh start, I think that's a very compelling story.
Thank you. So, I talked about being relentlessly optimistic. Clearly, there's no room for complacency at all, but I think there is a lot of positive signs and signals here, positive initiatives, and I think that's nice to end on a positive story around, the offer, the fact that we do have a compelling offer. So we've ran out of time. I just wanted to give the panelists a massive thank you for giving up so much of their time, for engaging so comprehensively in this conversation. Hugely appreciated. Massive thanks to the audience. I've seen you've been engaging throughout. It's been great to see you. And thanks for taking part in the polling. That's genuinely really helpful intelligence for us to understand what's going on out there. And finally, a massive thank you to AECC Global, who are the sponsors today and the partners for putting on this event. So thank you all very much indeed. It's been a great pleasure and an honor to have hold this conversation. Thank you very much.
AECC Global is proud to work with Times Higher Education to help students around the world realise their dreams to study abroad. Our global team of over 500 dedicated professionals in 34 offices throughout 12 countries are ready to support students almost anywhere in the world.
AECC is opening up a truly global network, and that's really impressive to me, and it's something that I really want to engage with and support.
AECC Global not only represented in so many different countries and provides us with a fantastic network, but is always very professional and innovative and a delight to deal with.
And they are incredible to work with, and easy and knowledgeable and innovative, you can think of it.
We are proud to have a growing global footprint. We are continuing to open new offices around the world. Our exceptional and amazing team is continuing to grow. We employ more than 500 dedicated professionals around the world. We've come a long way, but we're just getting started.
AECC Global is rapidly growing market share in the UK, Canada, USA and Australia. Technology is transforming the way students engage with education. And at AECC Global, we are leading the way with new innovations, shaping the future of student recruitment. We are creating world-class self-service platforms for students, making applying to university convenient and faster. Our brand new student portal launching in 2021 will allow students to directly apply to courses via computer or mobile devices. From start to finish, students will be able to choose courses and apply via our platform with our intelligent document requirement generator and compliance team, ensuring applications of quality at the press of a button. Students will be able to manage applications, insurance, and browse a wide range of relevant education content. Our tailor-made, user-friendly course search platform is redefining the way students can search and filter universities and courses online. With rich images and powerful search options, including career outcome searches, accreditation search, and post-study work visa searches, AECC Global is leading the way. At AECC Global, we are dedicated to improving the student experience, from making it easier to study abroad to making it more accessible than ever before. As we emerge from the COVID-19 pandemic, AECC Global is positioned as one of the top student recruitment organisations in the world, and we look forward to continuing to build new relationships with world-class education providers. When it comes to studying overseas, more students are choosing AECC Global.